All right, I think we're live on everything. Are you gonna hang out there? Or are you gonna take off?
I can hang out if you need me.
No, I'm good.
All right.
All right. Well, I'm gonna get started. So do what you gotta do.
Oh yeah.
All right, welcome everyone to Maximus Call-In Radio Show number 36. Sorry for the technical difficulties today. Our usual social media manager is out for today, so we're going to do a solo cast. Thank you for everyone who's joining us on Discord. Shout out to everyone who's joining us on Instagram Live, TikTok, Twitter Spaces, and Clubhouse, last but not least. So for those who are not familiar, we do a weekly call-in radio show where we start out with a weekly unpopular opinion and then take questions from the audience and also have pre-submitted questions as well. So if you'd like to chime in and ask anything live, I'm happy to coach you through anything related to mind, body, health, and masculinity and relationships. All right, so for this week's unpopular opinion, I wanted to share an opinion that essentially calling someone racist, sexist, or transphobic who does not identify as such is a hate crime. So I've previously talked about the dangers of cancel culture, but I think it's becoming an epidemic in America right now. And I think we're essentially witnessing a new era of McCarthyism. So if you remember your history back in the 1950s, I believe, a senator by the name of Joseph McCarthy claimed he had a list of people who were communists that he would not reveal and would accuse them of such. And back in the day, being a communist was a dirty word and would get you blacklisted from American society. So hey, Jesse, give me a second and I'll accept your invitation to go live together. And so, you know, for about 10 to 20 years in American history, people were paralyzed because if there was someone that you didn't like or was sort of your enemy, you could accuse them of being a communist. They would be blacklisted and they couldn't work, whether in Hollywood, the entertainment industry, politics, etc. Until this sort of fever kind of swept away, essentially a lot of people's lives and careers were ruined. And I think we're seeing that again today, but instead of calling people a communist, all you have to do is accuse someone of racism, sexism, or transphobia, and you can get them fired. Now, here's the important thing. Those things are legitimate issues that we need to face and improve as a society. However, the issue is, I think we're encountering a phenomenon that's exactly akin to the old story of the boy who cried wolf, right? So if you remember this old parable, the boy who cried wolf was this troublemaking kid who lived in a village and basically would tell the villagers, oh, there's a wolf coming, there's a wolf coming. And then, you know, there was obviously no wolf. The villagers would get pissed off because he's playing a prank on them. And then after a while, they stopped listening to him. The problem was the one day the actual wolf came along and he said same thing. Oh, there's a wolf, there's a wolf. But at this time, the villagers, they had so used to him lying and pulling pranks on them, they didn't listen. And so the wolf came in and attacked and killed many people because they didn't trust him anymore. And I think that loss of trust is exactly what we're seeing here. It's not that racism, sexism, and transphobia are not real issues. They are, but we have to be discerning about when they're real issues and when they're not. And that cannot be based on people's subjective feelings of, I don't like you, therefore you're a racist. I don't like you, therefore you're sexist. I don't like the thing that you said or the way that you made me feel, and therefore you're transphobic. Right? Just because someone has a difference of opinion of you than you, or quite frankly, has a different worldview, different politics, you can't say because I disagree with you. Let's say your stance on affirmative action is different than my personal point of view. Then you're automatically a racist. your point of view about the use of quotas when it comes to hiring women versus men, I think you can have a spirited debate about that, but it doesn't make you a sexist to believe in equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. And same thing, if you have a point of view about whether biological men who change their gender should be allowed to compete in the Olympics on the basis of fairness to women's sport, that doesn't automatically make you transphobic. And so I think that's currently the accusations that are being slandered, and it's literally ruining people's lives and it's ruining people's careers. Now, the irony of all of this is that this whole school of thought comes from a philosophy known as postmodernism. And in postmodernism, the belief is that there is no objective truth. There is only subjective truth. So your feelings are king. And basically, if you're saying my feelings are hurt, then you are traumatizing me. By the way, that's the other term that's overused is trauma. Everything is now a micro trauma, no matter how slight it is, which in my opinion, having served veterans who came back from foreign wars, it's a tremendous insult to people who encountered real traumas, which in the DSM, a real trauma is formally requires a physical threat of violence or death, either to you or vicariously to someone next to you. It doesn't mean that your feelings are hurt because someone insulted you. That does not qualify for PTSD. There has to be a threatened loss of life or limb, essentially. And that's where we as a society decide that constitutes PTSD. And so we shouldn't misuse the term trauma. We misuse the term toxic. Everything is toxic nowadays. And we misuse the term racist, sexist, and transphobic. And we should reserve those for when someone identifies as such. Now, why is this important, the identification issue? Because according to postmodernism, you can identify as anything, right? There are apparently multiple genders. And if you decide that you're a different gender than the one that you're biologically born with, that's okay. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but let's just assume that that's correct from a postmodernistic point of view. The danger with that is, where do you draw the line? So if anyone can be any gender they want, fine, so be it. Can anyone be any age that they want, right? If you're a 40-year-old male, can you decide to be a 17-year-old male because you identify as being young? You're like, I'm young, I'm healthy. So I therefore identify as 17. You have to call me 17. I can legally fill out my paperwork as being 17. And I get the rights and privileges of a 17-year-old. Meaning, first, like for instance, if I commit a murder, I don't have to be tried as an adult because I'm 17. If I sleep with a 16-year-old woman, it's not considered pedophilia because I'm underage and I'm within a year of their age in terms of my self-reported subjective age. And therefore, it's not a crime. So you can obviously see how this can be taken advantage of in terms of, if you say your subjective age is whatever you want, you can literally bend the law to commit crimes that are not crimes because you're considered a minor, right? This is the dangerous slippery slope that we find ourselves in if everything is subjective. And so the postmodern point of view is, look, you can identify as anything as you want, and you have to respect that. Meaning, if you say, call me by my personal pronouns, then you have to call me that. Otherwise, you are violating my gender identity. If that's the case, I'm not making an argument that it's not, but you have to take that to its logical conclusion. So if someone says, I'm not a racist, I do not identify as a racist. I'm not sexist. I do not identify as sexist. I am not transphobic. I do not identify as transphobic. If you're a postmodernist, you have to respect what people identify. If you respect what someone's gender or chosen gender is, then you have to respect someone who says, I'm not racist, sexist, nor misogynistic, nor transphobic, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. And that's the irony and the hypocrisy of postmodern thinking. It's saying you have to respect, for instance, chosen biological gender, but you can't respect how someone identifies in terms of their racism, sexism, or transphobia. So in my opinion, you cannot be racist if you don't identify as racist. You cannot be sexist if you don't identify as sexist. You cannot be transphobic if you don't identify as transphobic. Now, it's not to say that someone can't act in ways that are incongruent with that, but there's a difference between racism and ignorance, sexism and ignorance, transphobia and ignorance, right? If someone is not meaning to act in a way that's discriminatory, then that's our job and our obligation as a society, as educational institutions, to take that person aside and say, hey, when like the University of California endocrinology professor who used the term pregnant woman and was apologetic because theoretically a trans man can also have a child, they apologized. They thought they were going to get canceled. Now, you can merit whether that's right or wrong, but I can tell you that that person should absolutely not be canceled and fired. Because even if you decide that the term pregnant woman is offensive, then you need to take the professor aside and say, hey, that was a comment that you made obviously out of ignorance. You didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. You obviously apologized immediately. And you were like, hey, don't cancel me. Then here's the preferred term that the university collectively decides we're going to use. Pregnant man or woman, or whatever pronoun that you want to use. Now, it's up to the university to decide what is the appropriate terminology that you want to teach at a medical school. But you absolutely cannot cancel or fire someone for saying something out of ignorance. As opposed to, let's say a professor goes and says something that's blatantly offensive and they mean it to be offensive and they identify as a racist, sexist, or a transphobic. Then I think that's fair to say, yes, this person should not be a part of our community because their intention is to harm someone. They identify if they're like a card-carrying member of like the KKK. I think it's reasonable to say, okay, this person should not be on our staff because they're inherently offensive to the other members of our staff. But if someone has a slip of the tongue or says something that they don't even know is inoffensive, or you've changed the rules, like 40 years ago, nobody would have cared if someone used the term pregnant woman. But now they've been using that term every single year that they teach for 40 years, and now the rules have changed. It's the university's job to educate that person and say, hey, look, here are the new rules, right or wrong, right? Otherwise, you're going to be offensive. But you don't cancel that person. Ignorance is not racism, right? And I think it's a very important thing. If we want society to change, if the goal is to eradicate or at least minimize racism, sexism, and transphobia, you have to educate people and not just assume everyone is a bigot, right? Because that's the current line of thinking is, oh, you slip up, you're a bigot, you're fired. As opposed to, hey, this is where we're trying to head to as a society. Maybe what you said, maybe you're not aware, is potentially offensive. Here's the language that I'd like you to use. Let me invite you, but not demand that you use it, right? Because you cannot force speech, according to Jordan Peterson, and give them a chance for redemption. Redemption, in my opinion, is the hallmark of a civilized society. And so this is, I think, the dangerous slippery slope. I think if our goal as a society is to reduce racism, reduce sexism, reduce transphobia, the way that you do it is you go after the people who are self-identifying as such, and you say, hey, these people are bigots and they're not acceptable in our society. But the majority of people do not self-identify as such. The rest of us have unconscious biases. Maybe we're not educated. Maybe some of us are ignorant. And maybe there's some healthy room for debate about what is offensive and what is not. So we can't cancel 80 to 90% of people just because they don't adhere to some really strict norm that the postmodernists have set. And ironically, as I'm saying, by the definition of postmodernism, which is that everything is subjective, you have to respect how someone self-identifies. You cannot claim that someone who's racist, who doesn't identify as racist, is racist, or someone who says that they're not sexist, they are by definition not sexist. So you cannot have your cake and eat it too. And I think this is an inherent hypocrisy of the postmodern, AKA woke movement, right? They want to have people identify as whatever they want, regardless of biological truth. They want everyone to identify them as the chosen label, but they get to choose and label you regardless of how you self-identify, right? So the rules don't apply to them, but they apply to you. And that makes no logical sense. There's no logical coherency to it. And so it's really not about truth. It's not really about fighting racism, sexism, or transphobia. Postmodernism is quite frankly a Marxian attempt to culturally subvert our society and go after people. And that's why, in my opinion, as my unpopular opinion, is calling someone sexist, racist, or transphobic who does not identify as such is a hate crime. So ironically, the postmodernists who try to go after and cancel people for being those things are the very perpetrators that they're trying to eliminate. And that's the irony, right? Is we're trying to get rid of hatred in our society, but the people who are trying to get rid of hatred the most advocate, the woke, social justice, postmodernists, are the perpetrators. And that's the thing that people are missing. we look at that. And by the way, it's a very small minority of every employer, right? Like if you look at Apple, who was trying to cancel the Antonio Garcia Marquez gentleman, less than 1% of Apple signed their names to a protest list, right? It's a very small minority, but they're active and they're loud. Those people are perpetuating a hate crime in canceling someone's employment, going after their livelihood because of something he wrote in a book that was very public, that Apple was well aware of, that just rubbed them the wrong way. And he does not identify as sexist, right? And so you're claiming that he's sexist. He's like, I'm not sexist. This is a book. It's satire. It's humor. I am not the thing that you're accusing me of. But they're saying, no, I don't care what your intention was. I don't care. It's my interpretation of your writing, right? And just because I don't like you, and maybe they don't like him because he's a Cuban Jew, and they're actually discriminating against him, but all you have to do is make an accusation of someone being sexist and say, that's not tolerable. And then Apple, the leadership there, it's really their fault, right? They say, well, we don't want sexists at our company. I can't tolerate having a sexist there. It's not good for our employees. And so he's now fired, right? And this is the boy who cried wolf McCarthyism era that we find ourselves in. And so the irony is the people who claim they're trying to fight against hatred and bigotry are the biggest haters, are the biggest bigots, and are the biggest perpetuators of racism, sexism, misogyny, misandry, and transphobia in modern society. Are postmodern, woke, cancel culture, social justice warriors. And that's the irony. They hide their intentions behind being virtuous and woke when they're the one who are, quite frankly, asleep, hateful, and are perpetuating hate crimes. And the biggest tragedy of all this is that the leaders of our institutions, our medical schools, our colleges and universities, the people who run Apple and these large tech corporations, because they're so paranoid of the organization getting their reputation smeared, ad revenue being taken away, that they think, oh, I'm doing the right thing by trying to be woke. But essentially, you are letting the inmates run the asylum, and that there's essentially terrorism. There's emotional terrorism that's happening by these individuals, and they're letting it go on because they think they're doing the right thing. And that's the biggest scam and scandal of the entire postmodernist movement, is that they've convinced relatively sane, people who should be running these institutions that they're doing the right thing, when in fact they're perpetuating hate crimes, they're perpetuating hatred, discrimination. They're letting people be accused falsely. They're guilty before being proven innocent. And we're actually going into an era of social regressivism that allows the real racists, the real sexists, and the real transphobics to get away with it. Because if everyone is racist, according to critical race theory, then how do you know the people who are really racist, right? If 100% of people have some bias, right, and we're all guilty, then how do you decide who to fire? Then you theoretically have to fire everyone, because none of us are pure and have zero bias, zero discrimination. There has to be a reasonable cutoff, right? Because none of us are perfect. None of us have zero unconscious bias. We know this from psychology. So literally everyone is cancelable, right? According to social justice theory, because in the end, it's the person that you don't like and you want to get rid of. All you have to do is point the finger, make the accusation, and the institution out of liability will get rid of them. So my proposal is this. Is it right? I don't know. But is it effective to consider people who don't identify as racist, sexist, or transphobic as such? No. I think it's much more effective to say the only people that we're allowed to call racist, sexist, misogynistic, misandric, or transphobic are people who objectively self-identify as such. If they don't, and you still think they're being discriminatory, then they're ignorant and they're in need of education, they're in need of redemption. But you don't cancel those people, you educate them, and then you redeem them. Because honestly, that applies to the 80-90% of people. So that's my unpopular opinion, although I don't actually think it's that unpopular. I think anyone who's rational and reasonable and is seeing what's going on today in corporate America and in education and institutions, especially anyone who's old enough to have lived through the McCarthy era, realizes that whether or not you're political, this is the most dangerous thing that's happening in America right now. And even if you are apolitical, you should care about this, because they're going to come after you. They're going to come after your friends. They're going to come after your family. And they have. I have close people that I know that have been canceled and have their lives and professional reputations unfairly ruined because of this. And so this is something that I care deeply about. It's something that we need to address as a society, and it's something that we need to stop. We cannot call someone ist, racist, sexist, whenever we feel like it, and smear the scarlet letter on them if they do not identify as such. It's hypocritical and it's hateful. All right. So let's take questions from the audience. So someone said, okay, you're right, but most people working at these companies just want to get the bag, they want to get the money, aka not get fired. I think you're right. I think most people honestly just want to do their jobs, keep their head down, make money, and do right by their family. But my point is, the sort of woke minority is a minority. It's not the majority of people. Most people just want to earn an honest living. But I think they live in fear, right? One wrong email, one wrong slip of the tongue, one wrong use of a pronoun, or like the professor used the word pregnant woman, they're not now privy to getting fired, right? So I agree with you. Even if you're trying to stay out of this, you're like, look, I'm apolitical. I don't hate anyone. I just want to do my job, and I love everyone. Someone will go after you because you didn't use the right language, and you're being policed now. That's the thing that I think is crazy. We live in a police state, even at the places that we work at. And even if your intention is to keep your nose clean, stay out of trouble, so all someone has to do is accuse you, and then your life is over, you're fired. So I agree with you. Most people are trying not to get fired, but my point is, it's so easy to fire anyone, right? I could make the same accusation to you. And so the only so this person is saying the only way to change is to create startups and fire those people. Yeah, that's exactly what, in fact, Coinbase, Shopify, and other what are called mission-focused companies are trying to do. Is they're saying, we're tired of this. We can't play politics every single day. We have a focus. So Coinbase's focus is to bring crypto to the world and deinstitutionalize or decentralize finance. And that's our mission, but we can't go after every social justice mission. There's a million missions in the world, and we can't put out a public statement every time there's someone that is trying to fight a social cause. And so Brian Armstrong said, look, we're a mission-focused company. This is our mission. This is what we're going to be public about. And it's not that the other stuff doesn't matter, but go volunteer in your own time about that stuff, and we'll support you. But don't bring it to work, and don't expect us to make public statements about it. So you're right. Big tech is not going to take that line, because I think they've been too infiltrated, and they're too fear and paranoia driven and liability driven, to be honest with you. But I think that's why they're going to lose. So my personal thesis is that woke big tech companies are going to be essentially driven by the woke minority of terrorists, right? They're essentially holding the companies hostage. It's literally a hostage crisis situation at Apple, Google, and these large tech companies that are allowing a small vocal minority to run them. Honestly, it's a lack of leadership, it's a lack of spine. While I think Brian Armstrong and Toby, who runs, I believe, Shopify, those are still leaders who are saying, look, we have a business to run. And most of the people here want to not live in fear, right? The irony, by the way, is people misuse this term psychological safety. They think if we're not using the socially approved language, it hurts someone's feelings, and that it's not a psychologically safe place for people of certain genders or gender minorities. That is a complete falsity. Psychological safety, if you look at the original Harvard Business Review article, or the studies that were done by Google, looked at high-performing teams, and they found that high-performing teams are high in psychological safety. What is psychological safety? It is the belief that you won't be punished when you make a mistake, right? That means psychological safety allows for moderate risk-taking, speaking your mind, creativity, sticking your neck out without fear of having it cut off, right? So ironically, cancel culture and sort of this woke paranoia that has swept the nation is the opposite of psychological safety. If someone is afraid of being canceled or fired by saying one wrong thing, we have no psychological safety anymore. And you see this at universities. Back in the day, a tenured professor could say almost anything that they want, do almost anything they want, within reason, obviously, but they couldn't get fired. Nowadays, they make one wrong statement against one wrong group, they get fired. And so essentially we have ruined psychological safety for the majority of Americans who work at anywhere, quite frankly, any large organization. And so I think that paranoia creates anxiety. People live in fear. What it does is it actually pushes racism, sexism, misogyny, misandry, and transphobia into the underground and fuels it, because some of those people who, let's say they're leaning in that direction, but they're not that way, they're seeing discrimination at work, right? And they're saying, well, this isn't fair. I'm being discriminated against when I'm not these things. And I think that's how you foster extremism, right? That's how you foster sort of political extremism. So I think you're going to see a push towards underground movements of people who actually are those things, but they're not going to say it at work. It's essentially the whole purpose of the KKK, people putting on hoods so they can do this in secret, right? And I think you're going to, unfortunately, see a resurgence of this, which is a terrible tragedy. And it's perpetuated exactly by the thing that we're trying to, avoid. On the other hand, I think there's going to be a war between what I call these woke startups and these based startups. Based startups being positive startups, right? And ones that allow for real psychological safety, in that people can make mistakes and they know they're not going to get their head cut off, and they're a redemption, not a cancel culture. Those startups are going to be more attractive because someone wants to go to work and feel safe, just like people want to feel comfortable in wearing the clothes that they want to wear. People want to feel comfortable with the language that they want to use. That doesn't mean like cursing all day, but it's being able to speak freely without fear of being fired while being reasonable, right? And I think this is the hottest, most competitive job market we've ever seen in history, especially for tech talent, including engineering. And my thesis is engineers are going to be tired of this, right? Even the ones that aren't political, they're like, I don't want to get my head chopped off because, the person who's competing with me and is jealous, all they have to do is accuse me of something, and then automatically I'm sent to HR and fired, and I'm going to get passed over. It has nothing to do with my work performance. It has to do with jealousy and politics and someone going and smearing scarlet letters. I don't want to work for a place that's not like that. Why? Because that's not meritocratic. It means no matter what I do, I'm not going to get promoted, because it's really about saying the right things and then making, avoiding enemies, quite frankly. And that's not how most people want to work and live. So I think woke startups have a competitive advantage in 2021 in that they're no nonsense, no BS places where if someone still cares about merit, about performance, they're going to want to work at a place that's performance oriented, right? While woke places, they all care about virtue signaling, right? They want to look good, not be good, right? They don't want to have a negative press releases and articles written about them. But in time, their performance will decrease, and I don't think they will do as well, except for maybe the large ones that are sitting on cash cows like AdWords that aren't going to go away anytime soon. But I think that's the sad reality. Let's see what some of the comments say. Yeah, I think it'll fade away at the end of the day. As someone who's worked at woke and non-woke companies, I don't think it'll live for long, to be honest. I was at a payments company that was pretty woke. And I will say most of these woke people are barely employable if they get fired. Can't pass more tech screenings. I worked at many companies. I still think this plagues big tech companies where there isn't much work to do, to be honest. Every high growth unicorn startup I've worked has barely any time for it. And they're a sideshow clown show. Another commenter says, spot on, Cam, and good wisdom I spare. A cesspool of virtue signaling mixed with incompetence. Another commenter said, honestly, most engineers are worried about compensation, man. This barely happens unless you see a lot of it. I still think it's not as overblown unless I'm just used to self-censoring. I've worked at high performance companies and they don't have this cancel culture stuff. At least on Engine doesn't fly, maybe the diversity department. So here's the thing. I think you're right. Startups that are true startups, they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to achieve product market fit. They're just trying to grow. They're just trying to win in the market. And so they're trying not to be attracted by this stuff. I don't think this applies to all companies. I think it applies to generally the bigger tech companies, right? The ones that you're seeing publicly firing people, and bigger institutions. I think the smaller, leaner, and saner, quite frankly, startups aren't as privy to this, although it's infecting them too, right? Like, the reason that Spotify, the founder, had to say, hey, look, we're not a family. Right? We're an organization. We have to fire people. You don't fire people from your family, but we will fire you for poor performance. And same thing, because they had all these people protesting that some of the guests or some of the episodes in the Joe Rogan podcast, which he's had over 1,000 episodes of, were not to their liking politically. And so they said, you have to remove these episodes or I'm going to quit. And so there's tons of these protests, right? Spotify is a big tech company, right? And so these are real incidents that are happening all the time. And now Spotify, you can argue big company, I believe it's public, or it's at least the size of a public company. I'm sure it didn't start out that way, but when you get big enough, like if you think about wokeism as an infection, right? It's a virus. If you think 1% of people are psychopaths, literally, which is what the base rate is, you need 100 people at your company to find one psychopath, assuming you get a representative sample of people. Now let's say you have a 1,000-person company. That means you have 10 psychopaths running around your company, unless you do an amazing job of screening them out. Now you have a 10,000-person company, you have 100 psychopaths, and now they all band together, those psychopaths, you have 100 psychopaths running around trying to cancel people. And I don't think, by the way, everyone is woke as a psychopath. I think they're Machiavellian, right? And as I mentioned in my article, Anatomy of an Asshole, I think 1% of people are psychopaths, maybe up to 5% in corporations. About 10, 20% of people are narcissists. But 50% of people who work at a large corporation can be Machiavellian if the culture is Machiavellian, right? If the company rewards bad behavior in saying, hey, you want to get a promotion, you want to get someone fired, all you have to do is snitch to HR and we'll take care of them for you, then you've created Machiavellian people because you created perverse incentives. Versus, if you're like, no, innocent before proven guilty, we have process, and we don't just fire people for no reason, or if they said something wrong, we give them, multiple efforts to remediate themselves. We don't automatically cancel them. Right? Like the Antonio Garcia guy who got fired from Apple didn't say anything wrong during his entire time. I think he was fired within the first week. He got canceled for something he wrote in a book 5 years ago that was public and Apple knew of. So that was the crazy thing. It's like he didn't do anything during his employment that could have caused this. And so you're going to fire people for past sins? Where's the room for redemption there? I think that's the craziest thing, is basically you put a scarlet letter on people and you say, you are unredeemable, right? There's no ability to move on and improve. So what does that say about us as a society, as a culture? Is saying you have zero opportunity for learning or for growth versus you can say, hey, I wrote this as a book. It's a satire. And what does that do for writers? So basically anyone who's a writer, the public message to Apple says, anyone who's a writer, if you say anything that's ever offensive and it's been published in a book, ever in the past, we can use it to prevent you from ever being employed here. So basically that means no one is going to write anything of value. No one's going to write anything controversial, anything thought-provoking, because someone will take that book and say, that book you wrote 20 years ago, I don't like you. So I'm going to go take it to HR now that you're hired. And I'm going to say, you know what? That rubs me the wrong way. It makes me feel psychologically unsafe. And then as long as they get 1% of the employees to write a petition, they can fire you. So basically, we're in this mass silencing that's happening because you're right. A lot of people do want to keep their heads down. They don't want to get fired. They just want to work and do good work. But basically, I think we're seeing this mass regression where everyone was trying to be on social media, put out their opinions, write their blogs, tweet. But now in this era, I think it's crazy to do so. Unless you're trying to be a public figure or the face of a brand, as I'm doing, I would keep dead silent. I would be anonymous on social media. If you want to express opinion, have an anonymous account that's not traceable back to you, or don't participate at all. Because anything that you write will be used against you, basically in the public opinion court of law. And there's no objective facts, at least in the real court of law. There's standards about what's libel or not, right? We know from the Hustler case, the Supreme Court case that was decided in 1988. It was an 8-0 unanimous decision of the Supreme Court that decided satire is not libel. Like, you can write a political cartoon making fun of a public figure and not say that you are saying untrue things, because most people who read a comic or a joke or a satire understand it's satire, right? We have to have the ability to make fun of people. If it's done obviously in a humorous way and people don't take it seriously, right? Unanimous Supreme Court decision. So, I think we've regressed a long way from that time period. There's a commenter here said, yeah, his case is really special as he was a high profile hire. I would say the majority are replaceable individual contributors, whether they're senior or mid-level software engineers that barely say anything and just focus on comp. But yeah, I do see myself not writing anything. And yes, self-censoring is rampant. So there's a definite cost, 100%. I think that's sad. I think the beauty of the internet, right? If you think there's a lot of downsides to the internet, I'm the biggest proponent of dopamine fasting, right? It's addictive as hell. But the reason I still use Twitter, right? With two reasons. One, it gets my public message out there, right? That, about psychology, the value of psychology, the value of taking responsibility, the value of accepting yourself, the value of loving yourself and other people. I think it's an important message, right? In terms of our morals and values to share. But the other thing is I like learning from other people. And not just the big public figures who write textbooks, right? Who are the voices. I actually think a lot of the times I don't like listening to them because they have biases, right? You become the no sugar guy or you become the low salt guy. And then that's your entire brand. You can never change your mind because that's what people know. You're the keto guy, right? But some of the small anonymous accounts that I follow, maybe even some of the bigger anonymous accounts, they have very interesting, provocative, points of view. And if we shut up all those people, I think the society at large loses because we need the voices. We need grassroots voices. We need the common man's voice to speak up and say, hey, this is my opinion, right? And I'm not a big time TV show host, but this is the way I see it. I live in the Midwest. I'm a farmer. This is the way I see cancel culture. I want to hear that person's opinion. But that person's opinion is they're afraid to talk, right? So ironically, I actually do, I'm starting to come around to biology's point of view that anonymity, anonymousness and pseudonymity, in which you have a username, but you don't know your real identity. Honestly, that may be the future because unless we fix cancel culture, there's no reason to stick your neck out, honestly, unless you're willing to martyr yourself, which I unfortunately am, to make Maximus successful. But honestly, I would rather fix the root cause, which is I think if we live in a society that requires people to hide their identity or hide under a mask in order to speak freely, is that a society that we want to live in, right? That's my contention with biology. I think he's right. But we're fixing the symptom. We're not fixing the underlying problem. The underlying problem is you can't go outside and be like, I'm John. This is what I think within reason, right? As long as you're not, doing obviously like screaming fire in a crowded theater or obviously saying something that's intended to be hateful, you deserve a soapbox. And you should be able to speak freely without, reputational harm or harm to, your sort of financial or personal safety. So I don't think the solution is everyone needs to go outside and wear a mask in order to be able to speak freely or to do it in private, in a hidden. That's essentially living under an authoritarian regime. And that's the irony of all this, right? All the people that I know in tech that have come from authoritarian regimes, right? They came from Eastern Europe. They came from places in the Middle East in which they were police states. There were secret police that were watching you. They were listening to your telephone calls. And people would literally whisper because they were afraid the police would overhear. They left those countries because of a lack of freedom, right? They know what it's like to live under an authoritative regime where if you say the wrong thing, you can be thrown into prison, your livelihood taken away, if not killed. And then they come to the United States in search of a better life, in search of freedom. Half of the tech industry are these immigrants, right, that work so hard. And then they find one generation later, their children are now essentially living under an authoritarian regime. But it's obviously, it's not necessarily pushed by the government. It's actually pushed by these organizations, right? So it's even worse. It's not a central state that's saying, oh, you can't do this, and this is the government's secret police. It's like every single company has its own secret police. I literally joke that HR is the new secret police, and you should never trust HR because their job is basically to just cover the company's back, and it's not in your interest to go talk to them, right? So we've essentially created decentralized secret police, and it's ubiquitous in every single organization. And I think it's a sad thing to see immigrants who have sacrificed a lot, giving up, coming to a place that they thought was the land of the free and home of the brave, and found that those freedoms are being slowly eked away at. So I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. I think everyone agrees that living under authoritarian, police state, that not being able to think or speak freely is antithetical to not only like American values, it's antithetical to basic universal human rights. But that's crazy. That's the world that we've lived in, right? And if you don't see it now because you're lucky enough to be working in base startups, you see it all around you. And this is exactly what's happened with these countries, right? Not all these places were authoritarian, right? If you look at Iran in the 1970s, very liberal, democratic. Women wore miniskirts. People had incredible freedom, and then overnight became a repressive police state. And that's how these things happen. They happen slowly at first, and then it happens very suddenly. And I think you're literally seeing that post Corona, post George Floyd, post Black Lives Matter. These are catalysts in society, and some of those movements obviously have done good. I obviously believe in police reform, but I think it's also done a lot of harm in that some people have taken advantage of, subverted those movements, and said, "Hey, this is now a great opportunity to actually institutionalize racism." Unfortunately, and go after people that we don't like. So, reading some of the comments, I have no courage to get canceled. I'm going to be a CEO, need to hire people eventually, and can't have skeletons. Need to pass the reference checks and the online checks. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're listening to this, I think it's an important message to you. If you start your own companies, think very thoughtfully about the culture that you want to create and the policies that you have about what people can say, what people can't say, whether you're mission focused or you're going to allow for every, social justice movement you have to take a statement or a stance on, right? This is the problem that Apple ran into, right? The Israeli employees wanted them to take a stand on the side of Israel. The Palestinian employees wanted them to take a stand, support Palestine. So what do you do then? Now you have two contingents of employees. Which side are you going to stand for? This is the inherent problem, right? You can't stand for everything. You're going to piss off one group of your employees or the other. So the correct answer is, look, we're in the business of making hardware and software. We're not settling on the Israeli-Palestinian debate. You could have your own opinions about it, but this is not the company's business. I'm going to read a comment here. In his only public interview after the Islamic Revolution, where a fanatic group of clerics usurped power with the help of left-wing Marxists, the Shah of Iran said, "The silent majority stayed silent." Yeah, what a powerful quote, and thank you for sharing that, right? I think this is a similar quote that Martin Luther King has shared. He said that, the silent, all it takes is good men to be silent for evil to take over, right? And that's what I keep conveying. Like I've never, like prior to 2 years ago, I never was a political person, right? But now I'm seeing this injustice everywhere. It's harming, me. It's harming people and friends and family around me. It's at the institutions that I work at. It's so pervasive. And if you're not feeling the impact yet, you will, unfortunately. I wish that was not the case. But that's why I keep sort of repeating this message over and over. It's not a political message. I think it's a psychological message that I'm sharing, right? In that we have ruined psychological safety for the majority of Americans. And the only way I think we address it is, you speak out against it, right? You say, cancel culture is not okay. Cancel culture is a hate crime. And if someone doesn't identify as the thing that you're accusing them of, then they are not that thing. And you need to make a substantial and weighty case otherwise. Otherwise, you need to educate them. And same thing, if you don't vote with your feet, I would say. Don't go work for woke companies that stand for this nonsense. I know they can pay you a lot, but there's a line and limit to selling your soul. Like I wouldn't go work for a tobacco company or a drug company, that I think is doing harm to the world, right? And most VC funds have vice clauses. They're not allowed to invest in sex, gambling, pornography, and drugs because these are pension funds that are backing them, and it's not doing good for the world, right? So they don't put their money where they think it's harmful. So the same thing with us as employees. Just because FANG companies are paying a lot of money, you can just easily be like, yeah, man, I just want to get the bag. I'm going to get twice as much money here. I don't care that they're, basically harassing and allowing hate crimes to happen under the guise of freedom. I think that's sad. What's the point of making money if you can't speak freely, right? Like that to me is selling your soul. Like, great, you make $500,000 a year, but you can't say anything. You have to watch your back. You can't have any online presence. You can't do anything that you want. So would you trade your freedom of speech, your freedom of thought, and to walk around anxious and paranoid that just because someone doesn't like you, they can cancel that $500,000 that you're making? That's the other thing too. It's not like you can keep it forever, right? Even if you try to keep your head down, like I said, all it takes is someone to not like you and just say, hey, like, you're white and you have white privilege, so you're being racist, and that's all it's going to take. So anyone, I think Ben Franklin said it best: anyone who trades um, freedom for security deserves neither, right? So be careful of the decision that you make. So I think the only way out is through. I think that there's going to be a revolution of based companies, including ours. We say we're an equal opportunity employer, but that includes intellectual diversity. Says that in every job description, right? If you have unpopular or contrary opinions, as long as they're in line with the values of the company, you can come work here. I don't care if you're left, right, black, white, or green. As long as you're smart, you have the right personality, you believe in the mission, you do good work, you can work here, right? That's the real freedom of opportunity. And if you say something wrong, I will coach you and try to remediate that, because that's how you learn, right? It's not to get canceled forever. So I think it's really important for all of us to vote with our feet. Don't work at these police state institutions, no matter how they pay you, because you're selling your soul. And if you do, you're not going to be able to sleep at night, because you're going to look back. We're going to look back on this just as we look back on McCarthyism. And anyone who's lived through the Red Scare, McCarthyism, those movements, it's a shameful period of time in American history, just like the people who lived through the civil rights. And imagine, there was a time we segregated people in buses and schools, and we look back upon that with great shame. I think we're going to look back upon this era with great shame and say, we canceled and ruined the careers of some good people who were not racist, who were not sexist, who were not misogynistic, not misandric, not transphobic, but we decided to cancel them because it was convenient and it was a nice power grab by the minority of people who were, quite frankly, Machiavellian, and we let that go on. So that's the irony. It's like, I don't think it's the Machiavellians aren't the true evil ones. They're just power hungry. The evil ones are the people in charge who let that happen. And this is kind of what I was saying in a previous show. We live in a sibling society, right? The people who are promoting this the most in universities, for instance, are not the professors. There's some crazy, maybe left-wing Marxist professors in some of the humanities that are promoting it. But it's actually by the students. It's the students that are reporting people the most, right? Not the professors. Most of the professors, I would say, at least, I don't know, 50% of them, 80% of them, relatively sane, and they've lived long enough that they've lived through McCarthyism and realized the dangers of it. It's these very, sometimes I would say well-intentioned and sometimes bad-intentioned students who are there like, all I have to do is report a professor I don't like. Oh, they gave me a bad grade on an exam. Well, that professor used the term pregnant woman. Let's get them canceled. And the university has to respond because they're terrified of bad press, right? And so you have this sibling society where these little kids are running amok. It's like basically a child who learns they can call Child Protective Services and report their parents, even if it's a false accusation. They're going to terrorize their parents and say, give me ice cream every day for breakfast, or else I'm going to call Child Protective Services and say you beat me. And then the parent's paranoid and says, don't do that. Sure, have ice cream for breakfast every day. That's basically the leadership of most of the companies that, especially the bigger companies that we see in America today. It's a lack of parenting. They're essentially permissive parenting is what's happening, where the kids are running the institution. These kind of radical, idealistic young students. Like I said, some of them are well-meaning, the ones that have been sort of infected by the mean, and some of them are terribly not well-meaning. But they're just doing it for fun, or maybe they genuinely believe and they've become Marxist adverts. But that's the role of father figures and parent figures, is to say, hey, cut this shit out. Like, you shouldn't be fighting with one another as siblings. You shouldn't be spreading hatred or canceling other people just because you don't like them, right? That's not the civic values and virtues that we have as a society, right? So that's the sad thing, is, like I said, and this is the whole thesis of Maximus, there's a lack of role models, there's a lack of father figures, there's a lack of parents and leadership in American society that's letting this go on, right? Because if we had strong leaders, and they're right, the strong leaders like Toby at Shopify, Brian at Coinbase, hopefully myself and Maximus, we're like, we don't stand for this discrimination. We don't stand for this nonsense. You have to draw the line, and we have to be able to speak publicly and tell other startups too. It's okay to be mission focused. It's okay to draw a line, and it's okay to say, if you're going to, use this to abuse power and discriminate against people, you can't do that here, right? Those are the people that we should be excluding. That's what I'm saying. Ironically, the people who are pointing the finger and saying you're hateful are the hateful ones, right? That's their projection, right? They claim they're social justice warrior, but they're promoting social injustice. They claim they're woke, but they're actually asleep, and they're actually the perverse ones that we should be fighting. But I don't think we should cancel them either. I think we need to educate them and say, hey, look, in this, you can be woke. You can work here. I have no problem with a woke person coming and working at my company. They can't act woke though, right? They can't go around making false accusations of people and trying to get people fired. I say, look, I don't care how radical liberal you are or radical right you are, but this is how it's going to be. So either align with that or don't work here. If that's not aligned with your beliefs, you don't have to be here. But we have to do the right thing by our company, and same thing with all the other companies. Let's see some of the comments. I will say that there's some opportunities that are temporarily good to learn from, but yeah, there is alpha in some of the research labs and current companies I'm at from a technical standpoint. So sometimes people have to go against their values to learn, unfortunately. I mean, that's a personal trade-off that you have to make. Is it worth the tremendous upside in terms of learning or finances to tolerate that? I mean, you gotta make that decision for you. Someone said, I have a lot of friends who work at Facebook research and Apple because they're on the bleeding edge. It just sucks that some HR person org did the canceling. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's micro cultures within macro cultures. There are probably some teams, where that's not perpetuated and it's still okay to work at. But you're still privy to the HR policies of the greater organization, right? One of the crazy things I heard at a university, they said that a student who you don't teach can make a complaint about you, someone you've never interacted with, and that will be part of your performance review. So that's the crazy thing. So even if you're on the cutting edge, R&D team at Facebook or Apple or one of these other orgs, someone who just walks by you, never talked to in your life, looks at you and said, you wear pink shirts. I find that offensive because only certain people should wear pink shirts, and that's disrespectful to pink shirt wearers and what they stand for. I'm going to file an HR complaint. They can fire you. You never even talk to this person, right? So I think that's the danger. Sure, you can suck it up for now, but I still think you're perpetuating a problematic culture by working at these places. All right. So today's show is very focused on this one theme, but I think it's an important theme, is important to talk about. Next week, we will go back a little bit more to our regularly scheduled programming, take a little bit more questions. I think we had some questions about ADHD, balancing dialectic thoughts, and about the role of sleep disorders in trending towards lower testosterone. So we will talk about all that and more. So join us next week at 6 o'clock, and I will catch you then. In the meantime, I just want to leave it on a positive note. Even though we are living in a very persecutory era and culture, most people are not adherents of those things. I think, unfortunately, it's a silent majority of people, and the loud minority only wins because we're staying silent. And so all it takes is not even everyone, enough people to speak up and say, hey, look, we're tired of this, for, I think, this woke cancel culture to end. So speak up and do the right thing, because this is your society, this is your culture, and we need good people who are willing to stand up for what they believe in. All right, be well, and I will catch you next week.